Hello and welcome to yet another lecture, and this one is on medical education. So, as I told you, one of the important measures concerning medicine and public health in the early days was the opening of institutions to train Indians within India for various kinds of medical diplomas and degrees. Um, So, medical education broadly had two main functions. One, as I said, was to produce locally practitioners, medical practitioners, with a level of what was deemed to be proper training. And then, because when it came to question of Western medicine, to use medical education as a tool for broadly disseminating that Western medical system and practices. And of course, before we go into that, it may be useful to take note of some of the major channels of transmission of Western medicine in the colonies. So what are these channels? One was the interaction with early physicians or travelers or missionaries from Europe, or some kind of familiarity with their writings, and the proximity that Indians enjoyed with colonial officials when they served, for instance, in native regiments, and institutions like hospitals, dispensaries, and infirmaries, where the wider public, even if it is only some small sections, but where the wider public came into direct contact with some aspects of Western medicine, and medical institutions like colleges, places where instruction took place, where the wider public did not come into touch, as in the case of hospitals. So these were only the people who were specifically trained, the students. But broadly, these were some of the channels through which the transmission of Western medicine happened in the colonies. So now coming to the question of education as such. So initially there was the need felt for Indian subordinates to perform routine duties, medical duties. So all of these personnel could not be brought from back home. So it was very expensive to train them there and bring them here. And of course, there are all kinds of other responsibilities for which people had to be brought from back home. And there was also the alarming rates of mortality among European doctors. So there was a need to have as many Indians as possible with some level of training, because it was felt that it was very unsafe to have them without training. So even if it was indigenous medicine or it involved indigenous practitioners, so they felt confident only if they were trained according to the levels they felt sufficient and proper, because Europeans' lives cannot be just left to the mercy of untrained pre-existing practitioners of medicine here. So without some kind of imprint of Western training. So some kinds of training institutions were established in the 1820s to provide Indians with the what was the appropriate level of medical education, and using which they could be deployed as sub assistant surgeons, dressers, and apothecaries, those kinds of subordinate roles, especially in the army. So, one such institution, for instance, is the Calcutta Medical Institution, so which was set up so with the explicit purpose of producing native doctors educated through local languages, with the vernaculars, and translation of English textbooks which were related to Western medicine. But they were also taught in the indigenous systems such as Ayurveda and Unani. So there's this discussion about whether this approach was a sign of open-mindedness, a kind of eclecticism, and the equal promotion of all systems by the colonial state. So on the face of it, it looks like that. But in the other hand, there will be some scholars who would argue that this was rather a kind of a ploy, a kind of a tactic to attract the indigenous practitioners so that they could open up to Western medicine instead of starting to talk in a language and with systems totally alien. So it is a bit tactical to at least start talking a bit of their own language in a literal sense, language in the sense using the vernaculars, and also in a more figurative sense, so alluding to or even using side by side elements of indigenous systems, as I said, Ayurveda or any other such systems, so that it's not entirely alien. So these institutions do not sound prohibitive, look prohibitive at the face of it itself. So some level of familiarity, some level of feeling at home to be created by using the vernaculars and including the indigenous systems. So this question acquires particular importance in the larger context of the debate between the Orientalists and Anglicists. So what was this debate? So this was, as I said, so once the British started settling down and began to take very seriously the responsibilities of public this and that. So in this case, public education. So there's this question about what kind of direction and shape that public education should take. Should Indians be taught in their own languages, with their own indigenous lore, literature, their own sciences, their systems of medicine? So people who are on this side who felt that this is how it has to be done, they were that was the Orientalist side. On the other side were people who felt that the British had not come here to be doling out more of what was already there. They felt very seriously on the mission mode, the civilizing mission mode. So, to bring the light of knowledge, British were here to bring the benefits, the blessings of Western science and knowledge to the colonized. So therefore, so Indians should be taught in English, and they should be taught more of Western stuff. So from Milton to Newton, and Chaucer, and others. Um, so this side, this camp was called the Anglicist camp. Uh, so of course, this debate, this contest was sorted out in 1835 in favor of the Anglicist side through what is called the Macaulay's Minute, named after Thomas Babington Macaulay, who was the law member of the Governor General's Council. And even irrespective of it, there was already a variety of criticisms about the functioning of the institutions like the NMI, the Native Medical Institution. They were seen as very unsatisfactory and unsuccessful hodgepodge mixture. So they were criticized for the poor quality and the inadequate amount of instruction, medical instruction. Um, and also in the light of the dominance of the Anglicist viewpoint in 1830s, and particularly certified by Macaulay's Minute. So it was only natural that these kinds of institutions were replaced by clearly, more clearly Western-based institutions. To start with, of course, even in these institutions, later on, some amount of vernacular element and indigenous components had to be brought in. But at least to start with, in the 1830s, there was a clear preference for purely Western medicine-based colleges. So one such example is the Calcutta Medical College, started in 1835. Madras had its medical school also in the same year, because it later became the medical college. So in these kinds of institutions, Indians obtained diplomas to start with, but once universities were started in the 1850s, students received a licentiate in medicine and surgery, LMS, and even obtained degrees like MD, Doctor of Medicine. What were the kind of career options open to them? Of course, one direct one was company service. Of course, we always have to bear in mind there were still elements of racism, all kinds of racial barriers, but still that was one opening available. And service with the Indian princely states and rich zamindars, and also private practice with rich private clientels, especially the nouveau riche, the new kind of new Babudam, the new officials, Indian officials, and Indian lawyers who form the nouveau riche. Of course, when it came to enrollment in these new institutions like the Calcutta Medical College, there was some initial hesitations due to misgivings about dissection, about touching, about the impurity that will be brought about by touching bodies, this, dead bodies, those kinds of things. And so it was seen that non-Orthodox Hindus showed more enthusiasm. For instance, people from the Parsi community or Indian Christian community or Anglo-Indians, these were the communities from which there were the early enthusiasts. But in course of time, so this changed, and Hindus from high caste families were also entering these colleges in large numbers. And there was, of course, a particular reference to the thriving nature of anatomy classes, the success of anatomy, and the ease with which dissections were carried out. For instance, the Madras Medical College report of 1852 talked about the teaching of anatomy and how the practical training there was better than anywhere, even in Britain. Of course, there are various reasons for it. For instance, the very availability of corpses, dead bodies, which was more easy in India due to several restrictions, limitations in Britain. And of course, there is always this comparison with British and other European schools of medicine, and the aspiration to be somewhere near those standards. So there was the General Medical Council of India, which was functioning from Britain, but set down the rules and regulations and standards to align the functioning of the colleges to these new colleges to British pre-existing and well-established British ones. Um, there were also attempts for obtaining recognition from the Royal College of Surgeons, which, for instance, in the case of the Madras Medical College, came in the year 1855. Um, and students in this college, these new colleges mostly came from middle class backgrounds, including the sons of merchants and government servants. But once a large number of graduates started coming out, there were questions and worries about employment opportunity, were there adequate number of openings. Of course, I mentioned several of the options, but still, this was not a field which was as lucrative as some other fields like law or education. And there was also concern and worry, of course, as I keep repeating, there's always that racial element. So there was a concern, reservation expressed among white medical professional about the increasing place of Indians, IMS, and other medical professions in the colonial order. Um, and also there is a cultural dimension to these new medical colleges, which were portrayed as symbols of superior knowledge, as examples of the good intent of the British in disseminating such blessing, as I told you. So that's one of the themes of the Anglicist side, that the British had that huge responsibility of opening the eyes of the colonized to the great blessings that the Western world and its sciences and literature had to offer. So the medical colleges were seen as emblems in that direction. So, for instance, the opening of the Calcutta Medical College was compared to the abolition of sati. in 1829, which happened during the Governor Generalship of the same Lord William Bentinck. During whose Governor Generalship, the Calcutta Medical College was opened, as well as the Anglicist or English debate was settled in favor of the Anglicist through the Macaulay's Minute. So, of course, sati is the cruel practice of the bride jumping into the funeral pyre of the dead husband. She was not supposed to live to the husband's death, and so that was social crime whose removal was celebrated even among Indians also. So the opening of so which is of course cultural, as a kind of a cultural amelioration. So the Calcutta Medical College was compared to that, so which meant that so it had that kind of a cultural ameliorative character to it. And of course, then of course, one other dimension of the medical colleges was that so these were instruments through which Western medicine itself got gradually disseminated to the provinces, interior of the provinces and neighboring princely states. But of course, they may not be, the influences may not be as acquired in the college itself entirely. So there may be the local influences that the local graduates would add to the practice, to their profession, which we will see in another subsequent lecture. And these colleges also were portrayed as a kind of a guard against safeguard against quackery. So this quackery was a term which was applied even to establish medical practices like Unani and Ayurveda. So, for instance, the Madras Medical College report of 1872 so refers to the prevalence of native hakims, who were practitioners of Unani. So these were termed as ignorant as well as dangerous, and so it was deemed as a responsibility of the medical college to address these kinds of the problem of prevalence of these kinds of ignorant and dangerous elements. And it was seen that the presence of these kinds of ignorant and dangerous elements was, among other things, due to the lack of employment of qualified medical men. So there was a felt need to expand the number of graduates coming out. So to increase the intake and the output from the colleges, so there was a need for some concession, and which also meant some significant departure from the Macaulay spirit. So Macaulay spirit was all about using English as a medium of instruction, and using by and large Western systems and knowledges. But to make these colleges also, new colleges also, more attractive and to have more intake, so new classes were opened in vernacular. So now we have, for instance, the Calcutta Medical College had a Bengali section, Hindustani section. Madras Medical College had a Tamil section, and so officially now we had the textbooks in the vernacular languages, which is a significant departure from the Macaulay mood. And vernacular manuals are also circulated by the colleges itself, and also to some extent the programs, the rigor of the programs itself was diluted, including the number of years, so less number of years of training and less rigor. And so among the trainees, among those who were taken in, there were also those from the alternative indigenous tradition and the so-called very so-called dangerous traditions. And talking about training, so these were, so what we are talking about now, whether it's a native medical institution or their replacement, the Calcutta, like the Calcutta Medical College in Bengal, or the Madras Medical College in Madras, or the Grant Medical College in Bombay Presidency. So these were institutions properly. So these are institutions where instructions happen. But apart from these purely education training oriented institutions, there are also other institutions like hospitals and infirmaries, which also offered some kind of instruction and training from the early days. So, for instance, the Madras Eye Infirmary, which was set up as early as 1819, so one of the first earliest of its kind anywhere in the world. So, not only in the colonial world. So, of course, its main purpose was treatment of the eye. There were lots of eye ailments reported both among the natives as well as the whites who came here. So its primary purpose was a treatment, but it also on the sidelines offered training and instruction. So this training which was given here, even these kinds of um, treatment institutions, was also seen as a tool of dissemination of Western medical practice, and also, as in the case of those colleges, a guard against the dangerous local practices, here in this case, particularly ocular practices. And all of these also bring to the fore the important element of native agency. So, in all of these things, the colonizers realized that not much could be done, even with regard to the propagation of Western medicine and the dissemination of Western knowledge. Not much could be done without the involvement of the local populace. So, even if it meant picking people from the so-called dangerous, dangerous group of practitioners, or in this specific case, those who are doing traditional eye care. So that element has to be noted. So even the first superintendent of the Madras Eye Infirmary, Surgeon Richardson, who had been specially deputed from England to start the eye infirmary, had a certain number of pupils very directly under his tuition. So why? In order that the advantages arising from his knowledge may not be lost at a future period. So, of course, so to make best use of whatever he could deliver while he was still here, but also keeping in mind that this could be one of the ways of disseminating modern eye care, and also guarding against what was perceived as evil practices. So all of these things go to highlight the point that medical institutions were not just about instruction, about training, about licentiates, about diplomas, about degrees, or about just curing, but they involved larger cultural elements, about larger flow of knowledges. And this is something which we will see throughout this course. So how medicine was not just about medicine, problems of disease of cholera and malaria and their cure, but involved larger issues of knowledge, culture, politics, and military strategy. So we'll continue to discover those in future lectures. Thank you.